Chapter 16, the haircut. Now, haircuts, of course, were really important because they're another symbol, another icon, if you like, of the Holocaust, because all of the Jewish people had to have their head shaven as they entered the camps. And the only reason, really, that I've been able to discover as to why this is the case is to stop disease, spread of some certain diseases and things like that. And it wasn't all that effective in doing so, really. There are other people that would suggest that it's about removing one's identity and individuality and sort of another method of control, but the only thing that I can locate so far is to do with disease control. And again, we start a chapter with it had been almost a year since Bruno had come home. So we've got this passing of time. He's been in this place now for 12 months. And for someone of his age, there are a lot of changes that are going to occur in that sort of time frame. And it starts out with a pretty horrendous event. Okay, his grandmother had died and the family had to go back to Berlin for the funeral. And we understand how this is going to impact the family because the father, and it mentions it in one of the quotes that comes up soon, hadn't had a chance to make up his relationship with his mother. Because you remember that she stormed out the last time they were together, and they hadn't really been back since then, so there's still that animosity between them. And we can see some really good examples of how that has continued, even after the grandmother's death. All right. When he goes back to Berlin, it says at the very bottom here, he could look through the window on the top floor and see across Berlin without having to stand on his tippy toes. So it shows that he's had a lot of physical growth. Maybe not so much social or a little bit of emotional growth. We've seen that occur, particularly in that last chapter. But definitely a lot of physical growth that's going on here. In the next part, father was particularly sad, mother told Bruno, because he had fought with grandmother and they hadn't made it up before she died. So there's good evidence regarding what I was saying earlier. There were a lot of wreaths delivered to the church, and father was proud of the fact that one of them had been sent by the Fury. But when mother heard, she said that grandmother would turn in her grave if she knew it was there. And that's quite accurate. That's quite an apt description. Okay, even though father was proud, because it means that Hitler is obviously thinking of him at this stage, but he's not doing it because it's going to please the grandmother, which is a bit wrong, really, a little bit superficial. And it continues, and this is a good indication that the father had discovered what was going on between Coulter and the mother. There was also the fact that Lieutenant Coulter had been transferred away from Outwith and wasn't around to make Bruno feel angry and upset all the time. His departure had come about very suddenly, and there had been a lot of shouting between father and mother about it late at night. But he was gone, that was for sure. And he wasn't coming back. Gretel was inconsolable. That was something else to be happy about. No one called him little man anymore. So the two women in the household are really displeased with this removal. And it's quite disgusting, really, to think that Gretel quite fancied Coulter and the mother was having an affair with this man as well. So it's a strange set of circumstances that are depicted there. And of course, Bruno's the only one that's happy. He's the only one that gets something positive out of that. So it sort of shows how different the worlds can be for different characters. Yeah. Yeah, basically. So he's worked it out. He's found out what's going on. And the father's ousted Coulter because of it. And we don't know what that punishment would have been. Like, within the SS, they were pretty strict on certain things. I would imagine he'd be court-martialed for that sort of behaviour. You don't know what the result would have been. Okay, and that's probably why there's... Yeah, I can't imagine you walking out of that one alive. So that's why there would have been arguments between the mother and the father in that instance. And it continues through... And Gretel changes a lot after this too. She gets rid of her dolls and she starts putting up the maps in her room, and she starts to follow the war a lot more closely. And she seems to have a bit of a relationship with the father while she's doing this, because he gives her some of the maps and some of the information. They continue through, and here we have this conversation that goes on between Bruno and Gretel. And we see how different they are still, and how much Gretel has grown and Bruno has not. Okay. And he asks quite nicely, Gretel, he finally asks, sorry, can I ask you something, if you make it quick? Everything out here, out with, he began, but she interrupted him immediately. It's not called out with, Bruno, she said angrily, as if this was the worst mistake anyone had ever made in the history of the world. Why can't you pronounce it right? It's called out with, he protested. It's not, she insisted, pronouncing the name of the camp correctly for him, but Bruno frowned and shrugged his shoulders at the same time. But that's what I said, he said. So even though he's being corrected, he doesn't get the difference. He doesn't perceive what he's doing as being any different to what other people are saying around him. So he's unable to sort of understand that difference. So that sort of shows how naive and how childish he still really is. Okay? Anyway, the conversation continues, and he doesn't know how to word his question because he never has done this properly before. And he goes, I don't understand why we're not allowed on the other side of it. What's so wrong with us that we can't go over there and play? So he doesn't want to know why they're imprisoned, why their civil rights have all been taken away from them. It's why can't I go over there and play with them? Because this fence is preventing me from doing that. So it's a very childish way to sort of depict that concern that he has. And it shows the innocence, his childhood, childish innocence quite well. And she doesn't know how to sort of deal with it. She doesn't know how to answer this question really well, except to say that they're Jews and that's why they're in there. And Bruno wants to know what's the difference between us and them. And she can't answer it. All she says is, the people on that side are Jews and we are not. We're the opposite. And that is a ridiculous division to be making. And Bruno sees that. I think Gretel almost sees that as she's saying those lines. And as an audience, we're like, well, yeah, that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? That's the stupidity of what's going on here. So those quotes that are highlighted there are really important in showing how ludicrous this whole situation is. And as this sort of continues, Gretel keeps playing with the hair and brushing her hair, and she notices that she's got a small egg the size of a pin in her hair, which is head lice. And this is a horrendous thing because it's very difficult to get rid of, particularly for girls with long hair at this age and this time. And so she has to go through all this sort of special shampooing that stinks. And so does Bruno. And then Father decided that the best thing was for him to start afresh, and he got a razor and shaved all Bruno's hair off, which made Bruno cry. It didn't take long, and he hated seeing all his hair float down from his head and land on the floor at his feet. But Father said it had to be done. Afterwards, Bruno looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and felt sick. So Bruno's seeing the importance of having his hair, his personality, his individuality, his identity almost. And that's being shaven from him, taken from him. And it upsets him, even though the reason for it is to rid himself of this disease, if you like, the head lice that he's got. And of course, he starts to then put himself in other people's shoes. He starts to empathize with others. And he wondered whether all the people on the other side of the fence had lice as well. And that's why their heads were shaved too. So he's starting to put pieces together. He's starting to actually make connections between different pieces of information. When he next goes and visits Shmuel laughs and says, now I look just like you. And Shmuel responds with, only fatter. Okay, so it ends on at least that sort of jovial, slightly happier sort of terms. Okay? And we understand too that it's important that Bruno has to have his head shaved at this part of the text, because when he enters the camp later on, if he was to look visibly different to anyone else in that camp, he would have been identified and would have survived. But the fact that he's had this happen now and have to have his head shaven, that's the only reason why he's mistaken for being one of the Jews. And he's killed. Okay, so this has to happen in order to have the outcome, have the ending that we're expecting.